I want to talk to you about the rise of virtual kidnapping and how even you, wherever you are watching this, are at risk. And that's not ridiculous hyperbole. As you'll see as we go through the development of where virtual kidnapping is going, anyone on the planet, well, almost anyone on the planet can be a target. So let's start back in the past. For centuries, there has only really been one constant in the crime of kidnapping. You had to physically hold someone to demand their ransom. However, as global travel and the internet have become prevalent, technology has given criminals a new way to kidnap people without even being in the same country. So, Kai Zhang is a 17-year-old Chinese student at the end of 2023. He was on a foreign exchange scheme which saw him living with a host family in Utah while he studied at a local school. Unfortunately, Kai began to act out of character, and on 20th December 2023, police officers in Provo, Utah, spotted him acting oddly with camping equipment. They spoke to him, and while nothing was said seemed criminal, he was taken back to his host family in Riverdale because the police were worried about his safety. Sadly, a few days after this, Kai went missing. Shortly after, the police received a call which told them what was going on. Kai's parents in China had received a ransom demand. Kai had been kidnapped and was being threatened if he didn't pay the ransom. Kai's parents paid $80,000, then contacted the school where Kai was studying, and the school told the police. The police immediately started searching for Kai and who had taken him. The police soon realised something. No one had taken him. Their police managed to find via bank data he'd purchased camping gear, and from geodata on his phone they realised he was in a certain area. Multiple agencies started looking for him. They used drones. They found him sitting alone in a tent in the freezing countryside, 20 miles away from Riverdale. He had no heating, a sleeping bag, a blanket, a little food and water, and multiple phones the scammers had made him buy to use. He escaped hypothermia and was brought home. Kai was the victim of a new scam, virtual kidnapping. In this, the kidnappers contact the victim and persuade them their family is at great risk of harm unless they hide themselves away and obey instructions, such as sending photographs which imply they have been kidnapped. At the same time, the kidnappers are telling the family they've got their relative in prison and demand the ransom. At no point do the kidnappers come into physical contact with anyone. It's all done over communications. As you might expect, exchange students and people in different countries from their families are the most likely targets. Kai had been targeted a month before he went missing, with the scammers aiming to get money out of him. They threatened to harm his family unless he sent them money. Kai, feeling everyone was at risk, asked his parents for more money but didn't tell them why, and they refused. The scammers then repositioned themselves. They know they had Kai fooled, so they told him to hide and sent a video and photos which they then used to target his family. At the time of writing, while Kai is safe, his kidnappers have not been caught. It's believed they never left China. While law enforcement across the world has been aware of virtual kidnapping for a couple of decades, the opportunities for modern technology to be abused have seen it rise and spread. And as we will get to later on in this, they have become terrifyingly efficient. The FBI's history of virtual kidnapping in America explains that for them this used to be a problem mostly between inmates in Mexican prisons who reached out over the phone to people in southern US states. This once targeted process changed, and virtual kidnappers began being able to cold call hundreds of numbers in the hope of blindly finding someone who'd fall for it. How did this work? Well, the FBI had a general profile. Mobile phones would be smuggled into a prison. A criminal who had nothing else to do would spend hours calling every number from well-off areas they could. If somebody answered, they'd play a pre-recorded sound, normally a woman screaming, "Help me," and then pretend to be a kidnapper. Usually the victims would realise this was a scam. For instance, if every woman they know was sat on the sofa opposite them. But if you throw enough calls out, and if you're sat in a prison you've got nothing else to do except throw enough calls out, you'll find someone whose daughter is at school and who will pay a ransom immediately in order to save them. As you gather, this is a highly time-sensitive crime. Criminals have to keep you on the phone so you can't ring or find your loved ones, and they need to send you to send the money before they walk in the door. Kai's manipulators worked on an escalation of all of this. If you find someone far away from their family that they cannot immediately check on them, you can convince them to hide themselves away. So Kai was one of several Chinese students in North America, Australia, Japan and the UK who scammers managed to convince like this. It's unclear if this is one gang operating globally or lots of smaller teams. By now it is likely to be lots of large teams. The Chinese exchange student offers scammers a particular vulnerability. The Chinese police are an easy thing to threaten people with, even if you're not part of the Chinese police. You can tell somebody that their family is in danger or they're going to be accused of criminal acts, and the student has to do what you tell them. There are cases where the scammers have simply sent a victim to a hotel and done everything from there. Kai hiding in the mountains is actually an outlier. They don't normally tend to put you at that risk so far. The Chinese embassy in the US has issued advice to all citizens to boost safety awareness, take necessary precautions and be vigilant. But where scammers used to cold call hundreds of numbers, we have Facebook. Modern scammers can browse Facebook and other social media and find specific likely victims and build up a whole profile of names and details that can be used against the target. You don't have a phone number, you can find out the names of your whole family, you can find out where they are. They don't go in blind, they know who you are and are ready. Couple this with the spoofing of phone numbers and SIM jacking, which means scammers can send messages that appear to have come from your loved one's phones without any need to touch their phones in any way. In May 2022, a victim in Houston received a call from his mother's number demanding $900 or she'd be hurt. He sent the money as the call was from her number. She was asleep in bed. A Federal Trade Commission report on fraud imposter scams, of which virtual kidnapping is a fast-growing part, found it cost $2.6 billion in losses in the US just in 2022. Virtual kidnapping exploded in Australia in the last decade, leading the government to actually issue warnings. In 2019, 1,200 cases were reported with over $2 million in ransoms being sent. In these cases, the victims were asked to create and send photos and details about how they were kidnapped. They had to stage their own kidnapping, and then the photos would be sent to people. They were convinced to stage their own kidnapping because they were threatened with harm, thinking people were to get them or their family. None of the people threatening them were even in the country. One Chinese father sent $2 million Australian when he received a photo of his daughter gagged, bound and in ripped clothing. However, when the police found her, in an hour, she was completely well and alone and in a hotel room. She'd done the photo herself. Similarly, within a space of 2 days, a family paid $288,000 to secure the safety of a 23-year-old woman who was found completely safe by police shortly after they were contacted. Australian police reported that when people did report this to police, the kidnapped were mostly found within 24 hours. But they believe there were many cases where people never reported it, feeling ashamed. Of course, even when found safe, the victims of virtual kidnappings are traumatised. They actually have gone through an experience where they think they're being threatened, and in many cases people lose money. A detective superintendent told the Australian press that they've seen cases where the victim has been coerced into then becoming the perpetrator and acting as a Chinese official to scam other victims. For instance, one example occurred when scammers contacted a 20-year-old, the comment claiming to be Chinese officials accusing him of fraud in China. His family refused to pay nearly $250,000, but in this instance the scammers managed to fool the man into meeting two other men who were pretending to be Chinese police, gave him 4 documents that he had to deliver to other addresses. The police believe that A, the 2 men were victims who'd been convinced to act as police, B, this victim was then about to start 4 other scams. Unfortunately, part of that was nipped in the bud, but these other 2 men were never found. A 22-year-old man was contacted by scammers and found himself bullied by police into housing a woman that had been sent by the police for witness protection. An 18-year-old Julie arrived. In reality, she was also being scammed, and she'd been sent into hiding as part of the scam. The pair lived together, both being conned in different ways, for 8 days. She sending photos of her bound and in distress, and he thinking he was being ordered by the police to look after her. One of the few successes in catching the scammers also happened in Australia. In 2015, police raided a property which had been set up as a prison and call centre. Over 50 Taiwanese prisoners were inside, being forced to operate the cons. Organisations can be targeted. The US National Institute of Health had to issue a warning to employees after several were directly targeted. This is not always an international issue. On December 21st, 2023, the Grant County Sheriff's Office was so troubled by recent events they placed a long warning about virtual kidnappings on Facebook, saying they were getting increasing numbers of reports of it, and the number was coming from Spokane. But such is the way technology works, that number could have been hijacked from anywhere in the world. Now, I've talked a lot about foreign exchange students abroad, people a long way away from their families. And you may well be thinking, well, you started this by saying anyone's at risk, including you, the viewer, but you're not a foreign exchange student properly. Well, now we get on to that, because the future of virtual kidnapping is AI. Scammers have already worked out ways to deepfake for the photos and voices of victims to make convincing people much easier. Social media has provided endless data which has been transformed into fakes. Let me give you an example. In April 2023, Jennifer DeStefano from Arizona was called by an unknown number. She was just dropping her daughter Aubrey off at a dance studio. Her 15-year-old daughter Brianna was away on a skiing holiday, and Jennifer didn't want to risk missing a medical emergency or a problem, so she answered. She heard the phrase, "Mum, I messed up," uttered by Brianna, and then screaming. Then a man Jennifer had never heard before spoke. "Lay down, put your head back, listen here. I have your daughter. You call the police, you call anybody. I'm going to pop her so full of drugs, I'm going to have my way with her. And I'm going to drop her off in Mexico. You're never going to see her again." $1 million was demanded. Jennifer knew it was her daughter. As she later explained, a mother knows her child. You can hear your child cry across the building and you know it's yours. It was so obviously the sound of her voice. It was the crying, it was the sobbing. What really got me is that she's not a wailer, she's not a screamer, she's not a freak out. She's more of an internal, try to contain, try to manage person. That's what threw me off. It was the voice. It was the voice. But it wasn't Brianna. It wasn't even a Brianna who'd been conned into making the recording. Brianna was perfectly fine and completely unaware. Jennifer ran into the dance studio and another mother called the police, who immediately told her it was a scam, but Jennifer was hearing her daughter and the things that would be done to her, so she continued the dialogue. She was desperate, but fortunately she didn't have $1 million. A back and forth ensued, and Jennifer agreed to pay $50,000. She wasn't listening to the woman on the phone, to the police who were trying to intervene, and the scammer said they'd pick her up, put a bag over her head and drive her to a handover. If she played up, both were dead. Fortunately, one of the other adults had taken Aubrey's phone and rang Jennifer's husband. He rang Brianna. It was perfectly fine. She was in bed. He'd woken her up. What had happened here? The con men had used snippets of online audio they had found from social media and deepfaked all of Brianna's reactions, completely fooling Brianna's own mother. Now, the amount of audio needed to create a convincing fake is dropping all the time. It may now be just a few seconds if you have the right program, and the right programs are now very cheap. Also, they could have rung her up. They could have pretended to have been from a service. They could have pretended to be a wrong number and got a few seconds of dialogue that way. And of course, social media is very handy at telling somebody when your child is on holiday. If finding and deep faking a target sounds time intensive, you've got to troll through Facebook to find somebody that's away. No, it's not. AI is being used to speed it up. Trend Micro's report on the topic found AI was already being used to scan and assess vast numbers of social media accounts, and people were filtered and prioritised based on potential revenue and the likelihood of payout. There was a risk scoring based system for selecting victims. Trend Micro tried to assess how in a few years the AI systems we have would work for crime in the future. This is a direct quote from their virtual kidnapping post. In the future, with a large enough research investment at present, malicious actors can even create audio files of ChatGPT texts using text-to-speech software. In doing so, both the attacker and the virtual kidnapping victim, a voice clone of that victim, are fully virtual. When these virtual files are distributed using a mass calling service, virtual kidnapping can become far more effective and far-reaching. Basically, people will be able to deepfake voices for live conversations, able to get prove-it-to-me information directly from the web, and they will be able to make hundreds of calls in quick succession over and over, until a human might need to take over and take payment. And they can run this on millions of social media profiles. Yes. So the upshot is, be careful what you put on social media. I mean, that's the advice that's always been out there, but it is getting particularly important. Don't necessarily point out that your children are away from you. Don't necessarily put up huge amounts of video, because people can turn that into an incriminating con. The FBI has released advice for what you find. For what you should do if you have a ransom call. So the best course of action is to hang up the phone. Do not engage the caller. Try and slow the situation down. Try to ask names and things that maybe the kidnappers don't know. Try and ask questions of maybe the name of a pet. What you should immediately do is contact the alleged victim, so to find out if they're safe. Don't pay the ransom. And never, ever agree to take the money in person, because then this will stop being a case of virtual kidnapping and become more of a traditional